This is ContactTalkRadio.com. Consciousness in action. And you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Ping.fm, and UpSnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Welcome to What the Health, an independent approach to your health span. Have you noticed how our healthcare system may not have your best interest in mind? Join Dr. Eckel in this fun and sometimes disturbing exploration of the state of healthcare and what it means for you. Now, here's your host, Dr. Eckel.
Welcome back, everybody. This is What the Health, and I am Dr. Greg Eckel, and today I have a treat. We are talking 5 key strategies to build mental resilience and thrive with Emma J. Bell, and she is an executive coach, best-selling author, and resilience expert, a topic near and dear to my heart. Emma's expertise lies in the personal development of individuals and in the relationship dynamics of senior teams. She's worked with thousands of leaders, managers, and entrepreneurs to shift unhelpful thinking and behavioral habits so that they can become fully confident, focused, and able to make the difference they are capable of. Emma set out to discover what the key resilience strategies are that enable us to thrive rather than just simply survive in the face of a challenging trauma. So Emma dedicated 3 years of her life to researching what makes us resilient. That research ultimately took her on a journey of 35,000 miles to interview 50 thrivers from around the world who have faced extreme challenge and change and who are not just surviving, but thriving. Emma J. Bell, welcome on to What the Health.
Thank you, Greg. It's so lovely to meet you at long last.
Lovely. This topic is near and dear to my heart in that, I lost my wife 3 years ago and went through a process that not many go through at a younger age. And so the thriving component of what you're talking about here, I wonder if you would start out with talking about resilience, because this is not a term that you hear every day, and how you got into really talking about it.
Yeah, I'd love to. So I think it is really important that we understand what resilience is and what thriving is, because the two concepts are quite different from one another. Yeah. Resilience, as you probably know, many of your viewers will know, is about bouncing back. So when tough things happen, like the big things in life, like you suffered, but also the smaller everyday challenges that we have, resilience is about being able to bounce back from that. But thriving is almost like resilience on steroids, because thriving is about bouncing forward. It's about taking those tough things that happen, large and small, and focusing on how we can use them, as one of the 50 thrivers put it that I interviewed, to make us a better person, use them to grow, use them to help us find meaning and purpose. And the one thing that I discovered in all my journey around the world to interview these 50 people who'd faced quite different kinds of trauma, but all of whom weren't just showing resilience, they were thriving by the psychological definition, was that we are capable of thriving no matter what life throws at us, as long as we understand how. And of course, mental resilience is one of those ways in which we can thrive, but by no means is it the only way.
Yeah, it is. I like how you differentiate there between the resilience and thrive, because that bouncing back component. So the whole component. So you've picked up some really amazing insights into the whole journey of being human then, with this journey that you've been on. What sparked you to go on the journey of, uncovering these stories for us?
Well, it was probably a lifelong quest, in that, like many of your listeners and your viewers, had a challenging upbringing, but saw my siblings struggle more than I did. And so from the get-go, we were dealing quite differently with the challenges in our lives. But I was a litigator for 20 years, a judge for 10 years. And what I saw was that the people who were facing some of the biggest conflicts in their life, some of them were thriving, but others were forever defeated. They were barely surviving. And I really got to wonder, what is it that distinguishes those who thrive from those who barely survive? And And I saw that anecdotally in my own life. I saw that in my work. I've been a coach for 15 years. I've seen that in my coaching practice. And actually, I gave up my judicial role because I thought if I can find what people who thrive in the face of completely different kinds of trauma, if I can find what they're doing in common that we can all learn from to thrive every day, then that would really help the coaching clients that I support. And so, you get to a point in life, Greg, where you say, well, if not me, then who? Because I was working with a very eminent psychologist and we couldn't find anywhere anyone who'd done this particular research. We could find areas where cancer sufferers had looked in common at resilient strategies that enabled them to thrive, but not people who'd maybe survived terrorist attacks or gang rapes or whatever, radically different kinds of trauma, but all of whom were consistently thriving. What were the resilient strategies they were using to thrive? So much to my, I had a very supportive husband. So when I went home and said, look, I really think that there's something in this research, and I really think that I need to give up my judicial career and my final salary pension scheme to go off around the world on what ended up as a 3-year journey to interview people who've thrived in the face of trauma to find the answer to this. He did rather bravely, I have to say, I'm right behind you. And in fact, he came on the journey with me as my cameraman. And I can honestly say, Greg, it was utterly life-changing for me. I hopefully will have the opportunity to tell the stories of some of the thrivers, but they were deeply moved. I was deeply moved and they were deeply moving. They were in equal part very human like the rest of us. There was nothing at all special that distinguished them from you and I, but they were hugely inspiring because it shows us what we're capable of being, whatever life throws at us.
I love that. You're giving me chills on your lifetime journey of a lifetime there. And it sounds amazing. And I'm really excited for you to share those stories with us. So in a few that we have time for, so you found there's 5 keys to build resilience. So let's build on that. It is always amazing to me, people go through similar situations and traumatic events, and obviously it affects everybody differently, but some people come out, like you're saying, with really thriving, more energy, more whole, really transformed through the process. And other folks, it's like they've gripped that story and it defines them in a desperation spot of they never recover from it. So this is a really key component, and I'm really grateful for you sharing it with our listeners and viewers on What the Health, because it is, these key insights we can all utilize them. So yeah. What have you, so you found in all of these interviews, you boiled it down into 5 key areas.
Well, into 9. So if I can just sort of back up for a moment.
Yes.
Because it was a research project, obviously there were disciplines that applied. So it was really clear that I had to have an open mind that there might not be any commonality among the resilience strategies. And I had to be very careful in conducting the interviews that I wasn't suggestive in any way. But what we found when we had a team on this, what we found when we analyzed all of the transcripts, thousands of pages of transcripts from the interviews, is that over 80% of the thrivers identified 9 separate resilience strategies. One of those 9 pillars, if I might call it that, is mental resilience. And within mental resilience, there are 5 things you can consistently do, which will make you mentally resilient. So that's one of the sort of 9 pillars, if you like. And the thing I love about the 9 pillars is it's not like you have to start at pillar number 1 and work through all 9. Life is a roller coaster, said a songwriter. And just because you understand the 9 secrets to thriving, as I call them, it doesn't mean that you'll thrive forevermore. Life still happens. And so when a challenge occurs that knocks you off the thriving spot and makes you feel down or depressed or overwhelmed or frustrated or angry, the key is thinking, what of these 9 secrets to thriving will help me? And sometimes it's a little more self-care, and sometimes it's looking at finding purpose, and sometimes it's becoming more mentally resilient, and sometimes it's demonstrating more authenticity. But the wonderful thing about the 9 is that there'll be one, just one, that really makes the difference, depending on the challenge, on how low you've gone, and what support you've got around you, and so on. So I know we're talking today about the mental resilience strategies, because I think those are immediately applicable. But actually, you know, I might say something about 1 or 2 of the wider strategies that sit beyond that.
That would be great, and thank you for that broader context on it, because it is a huge topic. So that's fascinating. What are the 9 pillars, just out of curiosity?
Okay, so the first, I mean, as I say, they're not, one doesn't lead on from the other, with the one exception. And the one exception is this idea of self-care. That's a non-negotiable. And I don't mean going to the gym and eating your veg, right? I mean, it's a mindset that I matter. I don't just matter when everyone else is looked after. I don't just matter when I've got time, but I matter front and center. Because when you really understand that you matter, that your welfare, your well-being, your energy levels, your mental health, they all matter, then you're able to better support your kids. You're able to better support your loved ones, your colleagues, your boss, and so on. And what we found with people who are not thriving, certainly as a coach, what I find with people who are struggling, and as I mentioned before we went live, I do some coaching with people who've lost loved ones or facing terminal diagnoses of one kind or another. And actually, the first thing that we've got to work on is their self-care, you know, their self-worth, their self-esteem, their well-being, their mental and emotional health. And if they get that done, then they can start to look at the other 8 pillars. So I always say that's the foundational one. But another one is the requirement to give and receive support. So it's really important to have what I call your thriving tribe around you. So to be very consciously have your thriving tribe of your cheerleaders and your challengers around you, and to be really clear about who you're going to lean on for what and why, but also to know which tribes you're part of, because giving support, giving kindness is as important when you're feeling down, when you're feeling things are difficult or overwhelmed, as receiving support and kindness. And that's the emotional, the mental, and the practical kind of support. So that's really, really important. I don't know, you jump in at any point if you want.
Yeah, I'm going to ask a question on that. So because I find that's a hard one for a lot of folks to receive. They're more comfortable kind of giving, less comfortable receiving. And I don't know if that's a universal trait or if that's a North American trait, or if that's a male trait versus a female trait. But I've seen over 21 years of practice, it's more uncomfortable for folks to actually accept, especially in times of need. You know, I think there's this component, somehow a program that gets put in, like you got to be able to do it your own, or, you know, don't be a burden type of thing. And so I'm wondering if you found anything, or speak a little bit more into that, because that giving and receiving, I mean, I think the giving is so important that it gets one out of their own mind, and also contributing and making a difference and giving some energy out. So I'm wondering how you speak into that.
So you're absolutely right. What we found in the research, and what I find anecdotally in my coaching practice, is that people will give and they find it hard to ask for help. And there's somehow a stigma around asking for help because it's seen as weakness or vulnerability. But what we found in the research, it's really, really important, is that actually our tendency when we are challenged in some way is to isolate ourselves, to hunker in the bunker, as the psychological term would have it. And that's really bad for us. It's so important that we resist that urge to hide away, and that we go and ask for help. And we ask for the practical help, we ask for the emotional help, and we ask for the mental, the help to talk through our problems and so on. And I completely get the resistance to asking for help. I mean, I was a partner in a massive commercial law firm for years, and stress, working 8 hours a week and so on. Didn't ask for help, just got on with it. I wish I'd known about this research, because it would have been so, so helpful. And it also would have implicitly given permission to my colleagues to ask for help too. So we're all stuck following a set of rules that are not good for us. And if you're the first person to step out of those rules and ask for help, you give others permission. And that's the kind of thing you can do to be the exemplar of what is ultimately strength rather than weakness.
Yeah, it is. It's an interesting thing. I'm wondering if you found in the research folks that, kind of came up to the precipice and then actually asked for help. And then the flooding response is such a relief. And you kind of get into a point of like, why didn't I do that sooner?
Yeah, there was a variation actually. I think most of the thrivers maybe had some resistance initially, but they definitely were all clear. I mean, we were way upwards of 90% on the respondents on this. They were all really clear that they would not have thrived without the help of other people around them. And so the idea that comes through the research is that you don't wait until challenges arise, that actually what you do is you very consciously set up your thriving tribe of 5, 3 or 5, and you look for people in that tribe who are cheerleaders for you, who really have your back, a safe space to go to share your goals and your dreams without criticism, but also who are challengers, who will push back, who will, when you complain about things, listen, but then turn it around and say, well, what's within your control, what's within your influence, and what action are you going to take? Some mentors as well. If you're looking to achieve outcomes or goals, have people in that tribe who are 1 or 2 steps ahead of you, who have your back and can show you how. And certainly don't have in your tribe any of those drainers or people in the victim mentality or people who tell you can't or won't. And the challenge is that many of us are born to families where there are people who we happen to spend a lot of time with, who tend to dissipate our energy, mental, emotional, and physical energy. And this is about making a conscious choice to say, well, I still love them, but I'm not going to let them into my thriving core of 3 or 5 cheerleaders and challengers who know who they are and know that I'm on their tribe too, so that when stuff does happen, you pick the phone up. You don't wait until stuff happens and then scrape about and think, who am I going to talk to? So, I now do very clearly have those 5 people that I lean on, and it's been incredible. I've gone from, hunkering in the bunker during every challenge of my life, including a divorce many, many years ago, which was extremely painful, to now just, whenever something happens that has me reeling, I'll pick up the phone and talk to somebody, and it's just, I can't believe it's so simple and yet so difficult to do. We're so conditioned against doing that.
Interesting. So what are the other kind of pillars down the road?
Okay, so one of them that came through that was actually quite a surprise to me was this idea of authenticity. So this drive that we have to seek approval from other people is counter to thriving. If we allow our decisions or choices and our self-image to be driven by seeking external approval, you just can't thrive with that mindset. So it's really about understanding who you are, and that's an exploration of what are your core beliefs, what are the narratives that you've grown up with, which are empowering, which are disempowering. If you've got disempowering ones, how to change them, and really have clarity about what an empowering narrative for your own life means, what your core values are, and what your purpose is. And also knowing that your own approval is way more important than anyone else's approval, and having that drive your decisions. So that came through really strongly in the research.
That's huge. I think I have I've one left of my kids in the teenage years, and having that component for teenagers, like training and teaching around just that of, you don't need the peer approval. You don't need the societal approval. You have to know internally what is true for you. And, you're the one that puts your shoes on every day and gets stressed. So it is, how do you kind of uncover? I mean, that's such deep work, what you just went through there. All of those statements is like, that is a lot. And so I'm wondering, what's a step for folks on that front? obviously we're gonna share your resources in the show notes and along those lines, because this is a bigger journey for folks. But I'm really just really grateful to have you on the show today and get this information out, because now, even now more than ever, this topic of resilience is so important, and that one pillar that's a big one.
Huge. It's huge. And Greg, I mean, what I'm very happy to do is give your listeners, your viewers, a free PDF download of my first book, which is called The True You, which is all about how we grow up conditioned by our caregivers, and no harm to them. We're all just a product of the previous 6 or 7 generations. There's no judgment here at all. But so I've written a whole book on that, actually, as it happened before I'd done the research. But it still came as a complete surprise to me that this was one of the consistent themes coming through the research. Anyway, so I can give them that. But what the starting point is, if we're thinking about authenticity, the starting point is understanding what are my core beliefs, because that's the roadmap. And then, of course, you've got your core values and so on. So I actually developed a core belief questionnaire based around the research that I did with the Thrivers, which has a series of 12 questions that help you work through and discover what your core belief is, and then to reset a new core belief. And based on all of the neuroscientific research that I write about in my first book, if this is your brain, how do you create a new neural pathway to embed that core belief? So for me, the starting point is getting under the hood of the core belief, replacing it, going through this process with a new core belief, and then discovering your core values, for example, and very consciously living out your core belief and your core values every day. If I were to boil it down to 2 things, those would be what they are.
Love it. Thank you for making that really laser focus there for us. So I'm really, thank you for that offer for our listeners and viewers. That's a really amazing gift. All right. Well, and are there other,
There's others.
There are others. Yeah. So we have.
But what we can do is let's take so I've covered 3 of them. I'm coming on to the 4th, which is mental resilience. And then before we finish, we can just do a little summary of the others. Otherwise, I can see that we're not going to get into any deep dive on mental resilience.
I know. I was thinking that too. I was like, okay, well, we got to get focused.
Yeah, where are we going? So shall we do a pit stop at mental resilience? And I can talk about sort of 5 really key practical strategies and some of the stories that arise. How would that work?
Perfect.
All right. Okay. Yes. Well, I think, and before we do go to the 5 strategies, I think there's some key things that your listeners and viewers might find helpful to understand about the way the brain works normally. And you'll know this yourself, I know. But, if we look at the Harvard Medical Research study of 210, for example, what that tells us very clearly is that 2/3 of our thinking is either negative or redundant. So 65% of our thinking is either fretting about things that happened in the past, worrying about things that may or may not happen in the future. But what the Thrivers had learned to do is that they had learned to be much more conscious about what they were thinking. So it does require that consciousness. That's what I'm going to talk a bit more about in a moment. So the first mental resilience strategy is about controlling the narrative, actually taking conscious control of the narrative. So if you think about the ABC model, and the fact that A is the activating event, B is our belief or our thinking about the activating event, and C is the consequence, how we feel or respond. What the Thrivers were really clear about is that they had various activating events, various things that had happened, but they were in control of their thinking, their narrative, their be about what had happened. And it's the mental resilience, this is the foundation stone of the mental resilience, that you consciously choose that so that you choose your response. So if I can tell a story, I think of one of the Thrivers that really illustrates this well. Okay. So there's a wonderful Thriver, Kia Share. So 9 Secrets to Thriving is first and foremost an audiobook at the moment, and Kia Share actually speaks on the book. She's incredible. So she was married to Alan. They had a 13-year-old daughter, Naomi, and Alan, Kia, and Naomi were due to go to Mumbai on a meditation retreat with the Synchronicity Foundation. Kia, however, didn't go in the end. She stayed in Florida to look after her mum. Alan and Naomi went off to Mumbai. And on the Wednesday lunchtime, Kia was making a pot of tea for her and her mum to sit down and watch Oprah Winfrey. And she got a call from one of the women who was on retreat in Mumbai to say that terrorists had taken over the Oberoi Hotel, where Alan and Naomi and certain of the others were staying. And Kia told me she fell to her knees when she got that call, and she spent the next 2 days just watching CNN, trying to get any news at all about Alan and Naomi and what was happening. She couldn't get through to the hotel. And it was on Friday late morning that the news came through that both Alan and Naomi had been murdered in the restaurant of the Oberoi Hotel by the terrorists. And now, when I interviewed Kia in person, and that was not so many years after these terrorist attacks. And of course, we'd been through the pre-interview process. I knew she'd satisfied her definition of thriving. But honestly, I don't know if I could thrive in the face of that. And the whole purpose of the interview was just to understand, how had she got to where she now was, where she had been out to Mumbai, she'd visited a number of the families, she'd written a book about it, she was in this really peaceful state. And she told me a story of a few weeks after the death of Alan and Naomi. She was asked to attend a press conference, and she did so as a favour to the Synchronicity Foundation. So she's in this hall with hordes of journalists. And one of the journalists asked her, how could she ever forgive the terrorists who'd murdered her husband and child? And what she said was, there's nothing to forgive. They were doing the best they could with the thinking they had at the time. Now, she wanted to point out that she was not condoning what had happened, but she said, Emma, I had to choose the narrative, because if I didn't consciously choose that narrative, it would have chosen me. What would have chosen me would have been hatred, would have been victimhood, would have been anger. And she said, I was determined to honour the deaths of Alan and Naomi. I was determined to find some peace in all of this. And the only way I knew how was to understand that actually we're all doing the best we can with the thinking we have. And these men had been radicalised. What they'd done was wrong. They'd committed acts of terror, of murder. You know, that was horrific. But me adding hate to the equation was not going to help anything. And I had to find my peace, and to find my peace relied on me choosing a narrative as a foundation for that peace. And that brings us back to the A, B, and C, you know, the activating event, even if in this case, it's the murder of your husband and child, we still get to choose what our thinking, what our beliefs are about that in order to produce the outcome, which is, will it be the end of us, or will it enable us to find some meaning, some purpose to move forward with it? And, you know, I think of Kia almost every day, because if I get an email in that I find upsetting or difficult, or I have a piece of work that didn't go well, or I have an argument with a member of the family, if Kia can choose her narrative in the face of what happened to her, you bet I can choose a compassionate narrative that will bring the best of me to the situation that I want to thrive in the face of, that will allow me to grow and be a better person as a result of the particular challenge. So that mental resilience strategy, number one, is huge. It is huge, and it takes discipline and it takes practice, but it's the most rewarding, I think, of all of the 5 that I'm going to talk about. Wow.
Yeah, that's incredible. And thank you for sharing the story. And I can't wait to hear her voice on your audiobook. That is, so that component of composure, that does take some work to get to that state. Did she know that, like at the beginning, like I need to create my narrative, or is that something that she kind of grew into with time?
So she grew into it. She was a meditator before Alan and Naomi were killed. So she had a sort of presence and an insight and a wisdom. And I think that helped her. But that said, I do think, like any of these mental resilience strategies, these are mental habits that we learn over time. So, you know, if your viewers or listeners do have maybe a relationship that's not working very well at the moment, or something that they're worried about, they should stop and ask themselves, what is the story I'm telling myself about this person? You know, am I labeling that person as unkind or unfair or difficult? Well, by labeling them that, you are giving them your power. And you can choose to take that power back. And I use something that I call the compassion continuum. And it literally is a line that runs from left to right. Now, knowing that our brains naturally have a negativity bias and that we make our minds up, we make a first impression of someone within something like 3 to 8 seconds of meeting them. And that negativity bias means that often the first impression or the lasting impression of someone can be negative. So we can have a colleague that we find difficult, and we treat that like that's the only thing that's true. But the truth is that we're all multidimensional. There's not just one thing that's true. And so if we label someone untrustworthy or difficult or malevolent or whatever it may be, we have the power to say, okay, we believe that's true, but there's a whole continuum of other things which are true. And why wouldn't I push my attention up this compassion continuum to a narrative which is much more empathetic and compassionate? Like, okay, they can be difficult, but also they're funny or they're kind, or maybe they're insecure. And I'm choosing to focus my attention on that narrative. And just when I do that, I find my heart softens. I find that when I see their sender profile in an email coming in, I don't get triggered the way I do if I'm down this side of the continuum. I find that when I really focus on this narrative before going on a call with them, that I'm in my own power, that they don't trigger me, they don't take my power away, but also that I'm able to hold on to my own compassion, my sense of self, and be able to build a connection with this person in a way that I just can't if the narrative is down the negative end. So, this is a really practical idea that we have this continuum and we choose where to place our attention.
I love that. Yeah, the old adage in simpleton terms is energy flows where attention goes. And we do have that choice in every moment of choosing anywhere on the continuum. So why not choose the benevolence and the compassion? That's how we would want to be treated. So that's lovely. All right. So you've got 5 of these.
I've got 5. So, well, some of them are much quicker. You'll be pleased to know. So we have the choose a narrative.
I'm enjoying the whole discussion. So this is awesome.
So the next one is really just the power of the pause. Simple, but not easy. So if we know that upwards of 85% of the thoughts we have today are the same as the thoughts we had yesterday, because we get stuck in that kind of subconscious thinking groove. And if we know that research tells us it takes something like 1.2 seconds for what we think to show up on our face, though I think I've got a short circuit somewhere, because what I think shows up on my face pretty much quicker than that, I think. And if we accept that the subconscious mind is running, 0.05 seconds ahead of the conscious mind, all that we need to do, and our best selves actually come from our much more deliberate conscious responses. All we need to do is to interrupt a trigger when it happens. So, people will behave as they will behave, and bad stuff will happen. And we are human beings. We get triggered into frustration, anger, irritation, whatever it may be, and we are not our best selves in that state. And what consistently came through the research with the thrivers was this idea of the magic 3 seconds. Because that 3 seconds is long enough to interrupt the speed over which the subconscious mind has over the conscious mind, the speed with which what you think can show up in your face and in your behavior. It's just 3 seconds. And actually 3 seconds is about the length of time it takes to breathe in deeply and to breathe out deeply. And so if instead of being triggered into response, we got triggered into the habit of breathing in deeply and breathing out deeply, we would allow ourselves enough time to show up in our best way. And what we know from research is that for just 5 days, if we just said from today, from this moment, from listening or watching this podcast, we were going to say, okay, day number 5 is next Wednesday. So what I'm going to do is just from now until next Wednesday, every time I get triggered negatively, I'm just going to breathe in and breathe out. Then we know from research, Pascal Leone, the Harvard professor's research, we know that 5 days from now, if this is your brain, we will have a new neural pathway which will have developed in the brain to start to support that habit. So it becomes easier after 5 or 7 days to just start to do that more automatically. And if we persist in that habit, within a couple of months, it just becomes the way that we respond. And if you think of the great leaders of the world, Nelson Mandela, and these really thoughtful people, you'll see that most of them were using the power of silence, the power of the pause. So, whether it's your teenage daughter that's triggering you, whether it's your husband because he hasn't emptied the dishwasher properly, whether it's that colleague at work, come back. I call it coming back into your own power. It's about, being in that place of power, that place of choice is just a breath away, about 3 seconds.
Love it. The power of the pause. Now, how many did you say the repetitive thoughts from yesterday, today was 80% the same?
It's about 85, 90%, depending on which research you look at. But 90% of one piece of research says that 90% of the thoughts we have today are the same as the thoughts we had yesterday. Now, a lot of those are autonomic and automatic systems, so they're fine. You don't want to look at your sneakers and think, how the heck do I tie these laces? It's helpful to unconsciously know that, but not at the rate of 90%, and if you think about your life now, and if you think, I really want to change my life, I want to shift from where I am to thriving, you're not going to achieve dramatic change if you've only got this margin of 10% every day. Right. And what the thrivers were doing was they had knocked the 90% way down to anecdotally maybe 40, 50, 60%. And even that was enough to be utterly life-changing. And that 3-second pause is enough to take that 90% right the way down, because you're no longer subconsciously reacting. Yeah. You're deliberately choosing your response.
Yeah, time for just to take a breath to come home. I love that. That's a really great way. It's on. I'm going to do that for the next week here.
Good.
I want that to be my automatic response. Yes.
Yeah.
Lovely.
So, and there's another one, and I'll attach a story. In fact, I'll attach a story which will work with the next two. So one of the thrivers I interviewed was a Dutch national called Joseph Ubelkas, and his father was Moroccan. So he was bilingual, he could speak Dutch and French. And he was an IT consultant, so information technology. He went off to Morocco to work. And one day he turned up at work and there were gun-wielding customs officers in the yard rounding up all these civilians. And he's like, what the heck is going on here? And he was frog-marched over to one of a few white transit vans which were parked in the yard. And the doors of one of the vans was thrown open to expose really tightly packed brown packages, 8,000 kilograms of drugs. And apparently all of the vans were rammed full of these drugs. And he, of course, knew nothing about this, but he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was taken off to the police station. And within a few weeks, he was charged with illegally importing these drugs into Morocco. He was put on trial. His trial was in Arabic. He didn't understand a word of it. He was sentenced to 10 years in a Moroccan prison for this crime. Now, these prisons are called sardine cans because there are 20 to 30 inmates per cell. And at nighttime, there are no beds. They're simply lie like sardines in a can, head to on the feces and the urine with the cockroaches and the rats. I mean, the environment was disgusting. And Joseph, at 23 years old, was facing the next 10 years of his life in a Moroccan prison. And even though he got his government involved and an appeal was lodged, it was all unsuccessful. And ultimately he had to face the truth that he would be spending 10 years of his life in these prisons. And he said to me that when the appeal outcome came through, so this was maybe 3 or 4 months down the line, the final appeal came through and it was unsuccessful. He said, in that moment, I knew that whether I was able to thrive or not was down to my choice, which I find utterly incredible. I mean, that still gives me chills. Yeah. To be 23 years old and to live in these squalid conditions and know that that's where you're going to be for the next 10 years, but have that presence of mind to say, I can still thrive here. And that comes down to the choices that I make. And this brings me, I'm going to mention the 2 resilience strategies, but it brings me to the idea of what resilience is, going back to your first question. Our resilient circuitry is here in our left frontal temple, and we inherit that from our parents. But that's only the start of it. Building that resilient circuitry is like building your deltoid muscles through repeated press-ups. And it's about the choices that you make all day long. It's about the decisions that you take all day long and the actions that you take. And you're either making choices that move you towards thriving or away from it. And Joseph really understood that. So, his granular choices were like, I need to brush my teeth every day to maintain my human dignity. That's part of the thriving jigsaw puzzle for me. So he got his mum to send toothpaste and a toothbrush and bottled water. He learned Arabic phonetically because he knew how important it was to have the support and connection of other human beings and to build that support and give and receive it. He even had what he called these freedom awareness moments that he would build into his day. So there were bars on the windows, and he would move his face close enough to the bars so he couldn't see the bars, even in his peripheral vision. And he would just watch the birds soaring in the sky and imagine he was one of the birds and have that sensation of soaring. So he was doing scores of these things every day, which is just really an aside. But it really reinforces the point that whatever happens to us all day long, remember, every challenge, large or small, presents an opportunity to choose to build this muscle or to diminish this muscle. And he really understood that. All the thrivers got to the point where they really understood that. So he shared 2 mental resilience strategies with me, which I love. One for its simplicity in particular, which I'll share with you now. So he said, Emma, if you want to build mental resilience, you just make a promise that you are going to stop complaining. Just stop complaining. He said, because either you're complaining about things that you can control and influence, in which case go control them and influence them, take the action and don't talk about it, don't complain about it. Why dissipate your energy that you will need to take the action? Go take the action. Or you're complaining about things that you cannot control and influence, in which case, what the hell is the point of complaining about them? So he really understood what happens to the brain. If we think about the emotional center in the brain, when we're complaining, what happens to that emotional center is that it inflames, and effectively, this wonderful prefrontal cortex we have for all of our logistical thinking and our reasoning and so on gets diminished. Our problem solving skills are diminished when we start complaining. And also, what it's like to be in the company of a complainer for any length of time. You just want them to leave. Yeah. So I love that. I love that for its simplicity. Just stop complaining. And so I've taken that completely on board. I just will not complain. Even if I have a headache, I think, what can I control and influence about this? I'll go do it, and I won't complain about it. It's a waste of space. Wow, it gives you so much mental space not to do that. But I do get some kickback sometimes. And I have to say, especially from the leaders and the managers that I work with, who say, well, complaining's really cathartic. I like complaining. I'm like, right, okay. Oh. If you must complain, I will give you a carve out. And the carve out is this: find yourself a blurting buddy. And that blurting buddy has a job. The first job is you're only allowed to blurt for 2 minutes, and that's it. And then the cost of blurting is that your blurting buddy then says, okay, you've had your 2 minutes, that's it. Now, what can you control? What can you influence? And what action are you now going to take? So I think just stop complaining anyway, but if you must complain, make it a rule in your house that you get a 2 minute window and who's blurting buddy. And blurting I love as a description of complaining. It's so onomatopoeic, Perfect. And remember to wear your blurting screen. If you are the blurting buddy, wear your blurting screen. It's this invisible force field so that when someone's blurting at you, the sludge is just falling on the other side of the screen and it's running down the screen and it doesn't touch you. So it doesn't take your energy away. Great. So this idea of, and it's so powerful for mental resilience. Don't complain.
Yeah. So the two components in there. So stop complaining.
Stop complaining. I've still got, so that stop complaining is my third mental resilience strategy.
Yes.
But it has 2 components. Stop complaining, and if you must, find a blurting buddy. Okay. Yeah. But then you come on to the fourth resilience strategy, which was also something Joseph shared with me. And the way I'm going to describe it is by borrowing an analogy that Dr. Amy Johnson, the author, uses. And she asks us to, and it's great for kids, this, she asks us to think about thoughts being like buses. Okay, so we have somewhere between 60,000 and 70,000 thoughts a day. Okay, and we ride around on those thoughts like buses. But we know that up to 90% of our thinking is the same day on day. So actually all the buses are the same. We're just riding around on the same buses every day. Now, if you were standing at a bus stop and you wanted to travel north, and the bus came up and the destination board on the bus said it was going south, you wouldn't get on that bus, right? And yet we get on buses all day long that make us feel frustrated, irritated, annoyed, angry. 2/3 of our thinking is negative or redundant. We are riding around on buses which take us to destinations that make us feel bad. And what Joseph was saying was, look, you've got to get really clear about which bus you're going to get on. So this sort of introduces the idea of mindfulness. Now, we're thinking beings, so it's not that we can't think. Anyone who's practiced meditation for any length of time, and I am an everyday meditator, will realize how hard it is to have a clear mind. You know, thoughts come in from all over the place. These thought buses are always there. But what you can do is when you become aware of these emotions that are attached to a bus you don't want to be on, or when you become aware that this bus is the same bus you were on yesterday and last week and last year, going over that conversation you had with an ex-wife or your boss, then you get off the bus. And there's only one disembarkation route that I know of, and that is come back to the present moment. Feel the weight of your body in the chair. Feel the weight of your body on your feet. What can you see? What can you smell? What can you hear? What can you taste? How does the air feel leaving your lungs? And then all of a sudden, you're no longer on that bus anymore. And we're thinking beings, another bus will be along in a moment. But what Joseph said was, I just would not have survived, let alone thrived, if I allowed my brain to conjure up all of the buses it wanted to conjure up because of the environment I was in. I had to get really good at choosing which buses to ride on.
Wow.
So that mental choice, exercising mental choice about your thinking, becoming aware and shifting is really, I think, really powerful.
Now I need to know, did he spend 10 years in that prison?
In the end, he only spent 5 years in the prison, but it was completely random in the sense that he'd moved over 4 prisons. He moved to 4 prisons over that 5-year period. And he had no expectation that he would not serve the 10 years. So he'd got himself into a point where I'm serving 10 years. And literally one day during the 5th year, the commander of the prison came to him and handed him a note, which said in Dutch, because it was from the consulate, that he was being released in like 2 hours. And he said that was so hard to come to terms with, you know, because by then he had no adjustment period. So by then he had a garden that he planted in the prison. He had a fitness area that he'd created in the prison. He even had a cat called Pee-Pee. And he'd all of these press ups for the deltoid muscles. He'd done all of these little things to create an environment that allowed him to thrive, to live his best life, even though he was in prison. So the mental adjustment it took to suddenly leave that prison, say goodbye to his friends and go back home was incredible, you know. And again, that might not seem like a challenge, but he had to use his own advice again to start to be able to rehabilitate himself and to thrive in that environment. So
wow.
Yeah, incredible.
Thank you so much for this work and research that you've done. This is amazing. Yeah.
And by the way, he's got the finest set of teeth I have ever seen on a man. And that was his dental floss and his toothpaste every day in that Moroccan jail. Amazing. So mental resilience strategy number 5.
Love it.
Comes with a story as well. Another Dutchman, as it happens, Jaap Bracers, incredible guy. So he was on a beach in Portugal. He's Dutch. He was on a holiday in Portugal, and he's on a beach in Portugal. And it was one of these great beaches with the big waves coming in and lots of surfers. And he said he saw his wave and he dived into the sea, but he dived too steeply and the weight of the wave pushed him down to the seabed with such force that his head hit the seabed, and he said he heard his neck break rather than feel it. And his body floated to the surface of the water face down. And he could hear all of the laughter and shouting around him, but he couldn't grab anyone's attention because he was paralyzed and he was face down. And he said he could feel the salt water seeping into his lungs, and he thought he was going to die. But another wave came and flipped him over, and he gasped at the air, and he survived. But he spent months in a Portuguese hospital. And he was obviously hundreds and hundreds of miles away from home on his own. And this was a hospital which the nurses spent all their time treating diving accident victims, so victims who'd become very suddenly paralyzed. And Jaap told me that these nurses had become inured to the cries of the patients, because apparently one of the effects of sudden paralysis is that you have nightmares, trauma, lots of crying out. And he said in the initial 2 weeks he was in hospital, he would hear the footsteps come into his room, of the nurses come into his room, and they'd go over to the monitors in the corner, and they would check his vital signs, and then they would leave again. You know, and he'd be lying there crying and trying to come to terms with it, but there was no contact or connection. 2 weeks into his stay, he heard these footsteps come in, and he just expected them to go to the monitor. But these footsteps approached his bed, and he felt this arm squeeze his left shoulder, which was one of the few places he still had feeling. And he said that was one of the most humanizing experiences of his life. Now, that is not the mental resilience strategy I'm about to share that, but I want to share the story of Carlos, the nurse, the Portuguese nurse, who, while doing his job, knew how important it was to connect human to human. And I always remember that, because I think we're doing our jobs anyway. Why wouldn't we connect human to human? We're buying our coffee anyway. Why wouldn't we connect human to human with the barista? We're walking down the street anyway. Why wouldn't we make eye contact? You know, we're human beings and we live for connection. And actually that's, you know, about resilience too. It's about our resilience. It's about sharing those special moments rather than pretending we're not all connected and we're just little islands going around our life. But anyway, Jaap was in this hospital, and all of the doctors treating him were telling him about what was probably going to happen, you know, so the extent to which he would probably be paralyzed. And Jaap said, don't tell me about what's likely to happen. Tell me about what is possible. Tell me about the outliers. Tell me about the people who surpassed your expectations, because if I aim for that and I miss it, I'm still going to do better than what you're telling me is likely. You know, I want to think what is possible. And so he really fastened on to this idea. And in the end, he was able to regain feeling up to his chest. He was able to regain 50% of the movement in his arms, which is transformational because he can wheel himself around on his wheelchair. And he is just the most enigmatic guy I've ever met. And there's a lovely story where he and his wife, Evelyn, his now wife, Evelyn, they had been courting for 7 years, and she had never known Jaap before his accident. She had been a dance instructor before they met. And for their wedding, Jaap only wanted one thing, and that was for them to dance cheek to cheek for their first waltz. And he shared this dream with friends. And of course, his friends were saying, don't be ridiculous, you're in a wheelchair. And he just remembered, we've got to ask what is possible? What is possible? What is possible? What is possible? He said, you only need one other person to come alongside with you and dream about what is possible. So on his wedding day, when the band struck up and he wheeled over to Evelyn and asked her to dance with him, and of course she said yes, he pressed a button on his wheelchair and this hoist lifted him up slowly until they were looking into one another's eyes from a standing position for the first time. And that is what you get when you ask what is possible. And that is mental resilience strategy number 5. Stuff happens, it's difficult. Ask what is possible. And when the COVID struck, and I'm a speaker and a writer, and my diary suddenly emptied, Jaap was I kept thinking, what would the thrivers tell me to do? And I kept saying, what is possible? What is possible? And I thought, well, I've got all this research on resilience, and we have all these healthcare workers. Why don't I just do free webinars to talk to the healthcare workers about how to maintain their resilience? And there's something about the question, what is possible, that gets your brain to turn away from the problem and towards a really creative solution that you wouldn't otherwise have thought of if you were focusing on the problem and all of the, well, I can't do this and I can't do that, you know. So if he can dance cheek to cheek with his bride, we can do so much more than we tell ourselves every day.
Oh, so good. Yes. That, boy, that's a great 5 right there. There's really not much more to say after that. What is possible? I love that. This is perfect for What the Health. Folks, if you like what you have learned here today, please think of 2 family members, community members, even complete strangers, but you got to email them and email them the show and let them know what you learned here today, because this is actually how change happens right here. It's why I created the platform, What the Health. Emma J. Bell, thank you so much for coming on the show. Any last parting message to our listeners and viewers?
Just to remember that we can thrive whatever happens. And I think you're a great example of that, Greg. We can thrive whatever happens. And I know that from the work that I do with people who face life-changing struggles. It's all about how you show up. And it's all about these 9 secrets to thriving and using the ones that will work for the challenges you're facing right there and then. And just remember, we're all human beings. There's no show here. We've got to be really vulnerable and remember to connect, because that's ultimately what it's all about.
Truly is. Thank you so much, Emma J. Bell. Everybody, this is What the Health. We are here on the Contact Talk Radios Tuesdays from 2 to 3 Pacific Standard, and also on the World Wide Web. If you like today's show, please go out and give us a 5-star review and let the people know what you got out of the show, because that, again, we got to get this message out. Thank you all. See you next week.